Oh, hello, everyone. I'm going to try to finish up the review here while the puppy is lying down happily and everything. And I'll try to get this all going up to you right now. Let me see what we got here. I just wanted to see where we had left off, and I'll try to figure it. Okay, I'm getting here. Very, very, very good. So the last part of this, and I'm hoping to get it all done here, has to do with we start to look more, perhaps more in areas we haven't covered as yet. I'll look a little bit. I have some glial cell stuff to discuss. I've got some smooth muscle stuff to discuss. Some odds and ends to pick up that are all part of it. So the glial cells, we all remember how important they are, and all the things that they do. I mean, they play a pivotal role in myelination. They play a pivotal role in organization. They play a pivotal role in the blood-brain barrier. They play an important role with regard to the cerebrospinal fluid. All of those things are part and parcel. They play the sort of an immunological role. Uh, so they think of those as the connective tissue that support all of the many of these vital processes not done by the nerves themselves. And you remember all the different, remember there are six of them: the oligodendrocytes, the astrocytes, the Schwann cells, the satellite cells, the microglia. Uh, I'm sure I'm forgetting. Let me see: Schwann cells, satellite cells in the peripheral nervous system, astrocytes, oligodendrocytes, uh, microglia, and the ones that I'll tip my tongue. The ones that circulate the cerebrospinal fluid and play a role in sort of in its production. The ependymal cells. I knew it would come to me. So, and again, this is when we talked about the astrocytes. There's two things that make up the blood-brain barrier. That is the first of all, it's the capillaries is probably the most important part. I think, and I checked with that with the neurologist some years ago. It's the idea of those extensive amount of tight junctions that effectively make the passage of water impossible from those capillaries. Any every other capillaries, with the exceptions of the ones in the testes, have at least some capacity, or maybe limited, sometimes greater, for water-based and tiny particles to go through. These do not. Additionally, you have the external barrier on top of the cells of the capillary membranes itself of those capillary cells of the astrocytes. So the two of them together play a significant role in creating that very relatively unique blood-brain barrier. So I think that all of that is significant. And again, the distinctions you have to recall is like Schwann cells are in, and they play the role of myelination, the peripheral nervous system, oligodendrocytes in the central nervous system. It brings us to smooth muscle, and even though we spent most of the time on skeletal muscle, the smooth muscle, first of all, is the relationship of the thin to thick filaments themselves. It's roughly 12 or 13 to 1, as opposed to the 2 to 1, which is characteristic of skeletal muscles. It In this case, it's not intracellular but extracellular calcium. It doesn't have T tubules. It doesn't have troponin. It doesn't have tropomyosin. It it doesn't utilize. It doesn't have a true neuromuscular junction. Remember, you have this sort of nerve varicosities, and it's it's really interesting in that regard. Okay, so it's very much of a different thing entirely that's there. The neurotransmitters vary. Again, it's not we're not just talking about acetylcholine, and again, typically that depends on whether you're located in the, whether it's sympathetic or parasympathetic nervous systems. Okay, the calcium in this case, and this is this important protein that we're beginning to see a little bit more of called calmodulin, and then the calmodulin activates those kinase enzymes, and then that's what eventually triggers the contraction, utilizing some amount of intracellular calcium, but basically a substantial amount of extracellular calcium, so that those myosin kinases become active with regard to that. But the key issue is, and the name gives it away, calmodulin and calcium. So the activated myosin kinases, what they then begin to do, that's they effectively create that cross bridging interaction with the actin filaments that are there. Again, it doesn't have that same structures of Z disc. We call them dense bodies. The arrangement of the fibers creates that sort of spiral kind of arrangement, and the arrangement of the supportive structures that the dense bodies anchor to allow it to contract in that sort of a spiral fashion. So that's again, it's something else. So are the dense bodies similar to Z disc? In that sense, they are, because it's something. Think of it as something to pull against, if you will. Okay. And smooth muscle is nowhere near as powerful as skeletal or cardiac muscle, but it has a great deal of its duration of contracture is extensive. Can it be as strong as skeletal muscle? Yeah, maybe for brief periods of time. Okay. Again, more extracellular than intracellular is really something that's significant with regard to that as well. The unique feature of nerves as compared with regard to the action potential as compared to skeletal muscle is certainly the fact that it's the unidirectionality. So in skeletal muscle, from that neuromuscular junction, the action potential proceeds in all directions. That is not the case. Everything is downstream. First of all, it starts at one. Remember, it's a nerve. For the kind of synapses we're looking at, effectively, it starts at the axonal hillock and it continues in a unidirectional fashion. So, what is the principle? What's really the player that's this? Those inactivation gates really play a particular role, more so than any other factor. I mean, are there other factors that are involved with it? Would it be sort of the anatomical arrangement? But I really think that the inactivation gates on the sodium voltage gated channels, that little piece that pivots, really creates that absolute refractory period and controls the directionality, perhaps more so than anything else. So I don't think that there is a substantial difference per se in resting membrane potential that's there. Okay, they both rely on the same things. They basically rely on a synaptic structure. They rely on the rearrangement of the voltage gated channels, be they sodium or potassium. So I think that they're really the arrangement is there's not the resting membrane potential is not a unique thing, because to some extent all cells have it that are there. We look at the resting membrane potential even of cells that aren't excitable, and they still say kind of sit around that -70, as you remember from the earliest lectures that we did. So I think that again, the the degree of the absolute refractory period has a lot to do with any one of a number of factors that that are parts of it, but it's relatively speaking small in nerves. Okay, if you want to think of it that way. So do I think the inactivation gates certainly play a role with regard to that as well. But it's really the remarkable ability for all of these, for a variety of phenomena that are there that we don't see it, particularly speaking in skeletal muscle. So I think if you have to look down upon it again, the inactivation gates probably play a significant role with that, more so than any other factor. Once again, and this is true for both nerve and muscular beg your pardon, nerve and muscular systems. I think that the similarities are again, it's all about frequency. Okay. So in general, stimulus intensity, particularly in the nervous system, and again, maybe there's a little bit more of the temporal or and area in the neuromuscular system. But if you're thinking about it in general in the nervous system, it's frequency more than anything else. And once again, when it creates an action potential, it creates an action potential. There's no variation. Okay? The action potentials are very much of an all or none principle, and again, that's I think one of those great distinctions that we do look at with regard to uh, the differences between the neuromuscular and the nervous system per se. And now we focus effectively in the neuromuscular system. You look mostly at neurotransmitter release, which is consistently excitatory, but we have events that occur in the brain. You have to think of it this way: there's signals that are constantly telling us for nerves to excite and nerves to inhibit. So we have to look at both categories of that. So certainly sodium entering the cell makes it more likely to depolarize. Potassium exiting the cell, okay, is is something that will make it more likely to polarize. Okay, let me rephrase it. I'll get there in a second. For whatever reason, I'm having trouble this morning looking at the dog. So, events that make nerves less likely to fire. Okay, if sodium enters, that's more likely to fire. If potassium leaves, it's more likely to fire. If chloride ion leaves, it's more likely to fire. So I think all of those are significant. Time out here. Hello. Hey, what's going on?